Because you've always taken such charge.
You are listening
to the Border Chronicle.
On September 9, 2020, Tanahatam and Hiachatam members Amberly Ortega and Nellie Jo David were at the sacred Quito Springs when all of a sudden they heard this annoying beeping sound. They both jumped to attention. It was machinery that had arrived nearby to make way for the construction of a 30-foot border wall. They both immediately ran to where the machinery was, an earth mover, and blockaded it. So in the following podcast, in really awesome vivid personal detail, Amberly Ortega recounts what happened that day, and she also describes what happened after. It's really great to have you here with us today, Amber. Was there a time when you were growing up where you felt like you could cross the border very freely? And was there a time when you really started to notice the presence of the border and the border patrol and the kind of enforcement apparatus that comes along with it?
Sure. Absolutely. So, yes, I grew up on the Tohono Reservation. I am a tribal member. I am also a Hiacharatam descendant. Growing up, before the increase of border militarization and before the presence of Border Patrol, there was a very different life that we lived. My relatives have stories, about being a time, where they were able to go back and forth for ceremony, for dances, for food, for gatherings, for celebrations. And it was a way that I grew up. I remember my mom taking us on our first horseback ride throughout the desert, and I remember being able to walk everywhere throughout the desert, taking journeys, just enjoying our life. And I remember when I got older, I grew up near the border. There were people, I remember asking my mom, and at the time, it was a known thing. People exist all over our areas. And as O'odham, we are nomadic people. We travel on foot. As Hiacharatam, also nomadic, we travel. And it's migration is natural. Migration is a known thing you grow up learning while being in the desert. Plants and animal, there's a way of life. And so I grew up, being free.
Was it even in your consciousness that the border existed at that time?
Not the way that it does today. I remember growing up with there being, so there was this sense of peace. People live in, from all walks of life in all ways in this continent, if you want to call it that, and in America, right? We grow up knowing our history. The Gadsden Purchase and the dividing of our lands and colonization and, how capitalism, came to be and the mining operations and, the displacement of our people. So we grow up understanding that our history exists beyond borders, beyond, for even the Tohono Reservation. The reservations, we grow up knowing that our lands, are beyond what we're educated on them being, and our people live beyond, all borders. So there's this innate knowing, and also, this understanding of who we are, being raised on a reservation, who we are as O'odham and what our cultures and traditions mean to our people. And there's this, there's a pilgrimage our people make, and it's to Marina, and Marina is on the other side of the border. And one of the things that we experience on those journeys is there's a huge, there's like a sense of welcome, like welcome home, welcome, on your journey.
From the people on the Mexican side of the border?
Yes, because we have relatives on the other side. So there's a strong history of our people connecting to the other side, our sacred sites. There's the ocean that exists, that our people also make pilgrimages to, our men specifically, as a coming of age ceremony. So our journeys as Autumn, as people, spiritually, traditionally, connect to surrounding areas beyond the border. And so growing up knowing that, hearing from your relatives the stories, and even how there's Autumn out there and how well they speak Autumn, or the things, how different things are. It's almost like this, for growing up when you're little, it feels like this mythical place that you're only allowed to travel to, as an adult with your family. And so yeah, I grew up seeing, with that understanding, and then also seeing the changes. I was about 9 years old, and this was about in '95 during the Clinton administration. And there was this, it shifted to there being, this push on this war. And it felt like we were warned. We had television, we had one channel available to us. So I grew up out in the middle of the desert, and at the time the radio station that exists on the reservation wasn't up and running. And
How close were you to the border where you grew up?
I grew up on the fourth village from the border.
Which is close, right?
Yeah, it's close. It's a place where my mother grew up, and all my relatives are buried out there in the cemeteries. And so yeah, it's home. And it was, I remember things shifting to this different place. And my dad, he even spoke to us about the things that would be coming around and how different it would change, things. And sure enough, we saw the increase of, border patrol. So then there became border patrol's presence. And there was this new thing, where our walks of enjoyment, became, a surveillance activity. It was, to them, it was, something for them to do, to follow us. They began to monitor, things. And I remember being a little kid, and my dad, he was a man who would go to work early in the morning, and he had every morning to explain to them who he was and where he was going. And it became, this agitating thing, because he knew who he was and what he was doing and where he was going and what he wasn't doing.
Did they pull him over? Were they patrolling around in vehicles?
Yes, they pulled him over often. They followed him often. It was a cat and mouse thing. He would pull over, and they would go over the same script every day. Where are you going? Who are you? And he would, respond sometimes in Optum, and he would sometimes respond in Spanish. And every time, they would give him a hard time. He would come home really upset, because he knew that, he was a target. He said that he knew he wasn't the only one. And he sat us around the, table, and told us, that we had the right to say something. My mom, she was upset. We also experienced that while going to school. Um, I remember them pulling us over and having me speak English, having me speak, they would give me a hard time. It was,
Did you speak to them in autumn, out of curiosity?
I did, I would respond in autumn, and that's what actually really upset them. When you respond in any type of way, that, shows any type of resistance, they would, become agitated. And there was a point where my dad decided, he wanted us to live off the Hanawata reservation. He wanted us to have a different experience. We ended up moving, and explaining to people who didn't grow up the way we grew up was difficult.
How old are you when you moved, just out of curiosity?
So I was in seventh grade, the end of seventh grade. It's a rural area, and there are more experiences he felt like we could have, more opportunities, off the reservation. And so it felt like there was no sense of peace we could really have when Border Patrol, began to exist, on our lands. And they call it Border Patrol checkpoint trauma. There's a lot of documented, cases where people have, experienced some type of awful thing from at the hands of Border Patrol agents.
Like, what do they do at the checkpoints to people? There, from what I understand, on every paved road going out of the Tohono Nation, there is a border patrol checkpoint. Is that correct?
Yes, they have, made false accusations, and, I felt disrespectful. I felt like, they really truly believe that every single person was a criminal or terrorist or a drug smuggler or hiding something, or, it just felt like it was those things. I definitely felt the changes. Staying away from the reservation was difficult. One of the things people who don't grow up on reservations don't maybe understand is that this is forever. Our connections to our lands are forever, and our family are forever. I've spent time connecting with relatives from different parts of my family, and there was a journey we took. There was a spiritual run we did along the border, and we did that in prayer, and it was, for all the desecration, for all the things. There's so much for generations, so many things that have been done that are wrong along the border to our people, with all people. And it was really heart-wrenching because there is this belief that we're divided people because of this border, the international border, because a line has been drawn, because um, road barriers exist, or now because this fence exists. There's these infrastructures that exist, and so therefore we're divided people. And it's something we're working to show, to explain to people, like, look, like, these borders, yes, exist. These lines, yes, exist. But that doesn't mean that we need to be divided. That we need to, buy into the, okay, we're separated, we have to do things different. Like, no, we're a people. We can unite in prayer, we can unite in things, we can unite in ceremony, we can unite in, with our voices. And so one of the things we did was, we ran from Darby Wells. Darby Wells is located off the Tohono Reservation. It's a Hiacharatam site, and it's a village, one of the last villages for the Hiacharatam. And it's a run we took from there to Quito Paquito Springs. And Quito Paquito Springs is located on the Organ Pipe National Monument, and it is a Hiacharatam site. It's an Atam sacred site. And so we ran from one sacred place to the other. And what we experienced on the ground from Border Patrol alone was a thing of its own.
When was this run?
This run was last year. So we gave advance notice. We informed, everyone that what we will be doing and who we were. And they were pretty respectful and understanding, as we passed through. But one thing we all noticed was once we hit the Kahanamathan reservation, our own tribal lands, Border Patrol, they sent their helicopters, and they did their moves. They swooped around us several times, and they kicked up everything. And this was after we had ran all day. We had ran all day, and all we wanted to do was rest. And so they did this to us at night, and then they did this to us in the morning. And we gathered ourselves and we continued to run. And then they set up this like roadblock. They gathered all their vehicles and they blocked the road. They looked at us as if we were in the way, and we ran through them. We just kept running and running and running.
What did they do? Did they do anything when you ran through?
No, they just looked at us. Didn't
Uh-huh.
say anything. They just looked at us. Then once we reached off the off the boundary lines of the reservation, we were greeted by other Border Patrol agents. It was the craziest thing. We all noticed this. On the reservation, we're targeted. We were harassed. Helicopters were flying over us, kicking up everything. Border Patrol was setting up, these blocks, and just giving us looks. And but once we reached off the reservation, Border Patrol agents were still there, but they were waving to us. They were rolling down their windows, asking us what we were doing because they felt like what we were doing was so inspiring. They were so proud of us. They were impressed, and they said that they knew how far we had been running, and that is really what it feels like. What we experience on our own lands by Border Patrol was entirely different than what we experience off the reservation. We did on that journey, we questioned, why things were the way they were and why we were treated a certain way. It was a journey in prayer, and a lot of things were done, in a really good way, and just going about it in the right way, is even in doing it in that way, we were still given a hard time.
Yeah, and I think hearing about that journey really sets us up to talk about Quito Springs, right? Why is that such an important place? Why is it so significant? What is its proximity to the border? And could you also talk about what happened on the day that in September of 2020 when you were there and you heard the sounds of the construction machines coming to build the border wall, what you did in that moment?
Okay, so Quito Springs out of Apia is one of the last villages for Hiachiratam. Hiachiratam are a band of Atam that are unfederally recognized and whose lands have also been divided into different federal agencies. And so there's a whole history. Before the arrest, it was important for a lot of us to attempt to educate those who are willing to listen, and also continue to inform ourselves with our own history. There's a history of our lands being taken. There's a history of our lands being desecrated. And, like I said, we exist beyond borders. So with the spring, it was important for us to be there. Quito Paquito is known to have a burial site for Hiachiratam. And Hiachiratam have a different way of burying their people, and it's what separates them, and it's what's, it's special. It's a special area. It's home to endangered species. It's a rare source of water. It's a rare source of life, and so it's extremely special and sacred to Hiachiratam and to all Atam. So many journeys, sacred journeys, pilgrimages have been made, and stops have been made there. It's our history, and with the border wall construction, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of efforts being made with environmental groups and even with the Tohono O'odham Nation. Trying to, get through to the Trump administration. It was this rush. How do we protect our lands, and what do we do? And as tribal members, a lot of us were going out and visiting and offering prayer. And for us youth, we were reaching out to our elders. How do we do this? What do we do? What is it? What is it that we need to do? And prayer was the emphasis. You pray, you go offer prayer, and be there and ask for guidance. And so that was something we were doing consistently. And the day of the arrest, there was also, there was this holiday that had passed. And so there was this sense of calmness at the spring. And we went early that morning, and as we arrived and we went to our, we each have this, place we go. And
how many people were you with?
Oh, it was just myself and Nellie Jo David.
Okay, and Nellie Jo David's an Atam member as well, correct?
Yes, and she's also a Hiachiratam descendant. Mm-hmm. And so that was the other thing. There's descendants from the Quito Paquito Spring. There's families that survived an epidemic. There's a history of what happened to the Hiachiratam and how the lands were divided. And so we're both descendants along with others. And so that was, what we were doing was making trips out there. We made that trip. We went to our, separate places. And as soon as we heard the beeping of the construction vehicles, it was like instant for both of us. We ended up meeting in the same place. We both ran out, and she, before I did, she already knew. She was like, "No, they're not doing this. They're not doing this."
You just got up and ran over there. without even thinking.
I grabbed water. I grabbed water and I grabbed my shauka and we ran over, and it was the day that they planned on digging. It was an earth mover ready to literally break ground with no one around, with no understanding of what Quito Paquito meant to us Autumn. And
so they were gonna dig right into the spring.
Yes.
Itself.
Yes. Oh, it was the near the border. It wasn't the spring itself. So Quito Paquito is located about 200 feet from the border. So where they were was right about, it was that distance from the spring, and it was land that had never been touched and harmed and dug into before. And so it was without hesitation. We had to do something. Nellie Jo placed herself, in front on one side and then I on the other. And so any attempt, this earth mover attempt, with him attempting to dig in, we blocked him. And then there was a tractor that came through. He was waving the bed of the tractor, trying to get us to move. And it was closest to Nellie Jo. So, she turned and, began to yell at him, and he parked the tractor, laid the bed. And as soon as he laid the bed down, she jumped in and started, saying, "No, you're not going to do this. You're not going to dig." And I stayed on the end of the earth mover, and, we did the same. We explained who we were and what the land meant to us, and what it felt like, for them to, be attempting to do what they were doing to our history, to our sacred place. And
how did they respond to you when you were explaining to them? You're talking about the people driving these vehicles, right?
Yes. So they stopped. They parked their vehicles. We stayed put, and we made several phone calls. And we had a camera crew arrive, and before they arrived, though, we had National Park Service officers and also the Border Patrol agents, several Border Patrol agents present, and there was we were taking turns singing, and as soon as the camera crews arrived, there was an instant, back off. They backed off from us. They literally decided, once the camera crews arrived, that they needed to reevaluate or decide what they were going to do with us. So
they didn't want to be on camera.
Yes. So they had body cams. So this is the funny thing. So these guys had body cams, and so they did.
The construction workers had body cams, or the Border Patrol agents?
Border Patrol agents and the National Park Service. They had their body cams. They had their cell phones out. So they were going back and forth, trying to decide what to do. They eventually removed Nellie Jo David, and so they carried her out of the bed and
forcibly. Did Nellie Jo David go on her own, or did they have to lift her out of the bucket?
They literally lifted her. They lifted her. She refused to be, taken, and so they lifted her. And so as they did that, I yelled, and so they arrested her. They got her in a van, and they told me that I had permission to leave. And I asked them if they could leave. And we went through this back and forth. And as this was happening, they all began to encroach.
They were coming on to you, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to explain, look, I'm not refusing to leave. I'm asking you to leave. And I'm also not resisting arrest. And, I just kept going and going and going as they arrested me. And so we didn't have any charges. They told us they were going to take us to Ajo. And instead they took us to the Lukeville Port of Entry, where they fingerprinted us and searched us. And then they took us to Core Civic. And Core Civic is a for-profit migrant detention center. And this was during COVID.
And that's far away, right? It's not close to where you were.
Yes, I was in Florence. And so we were taken there without charges. we had to advocate for ourselves while there, for them to wear gloves, we had to ask for hand soap. There was no hand sanitizer available. And it was this back and forth of like, why are we here and what are our charges and how long will we be here and can we speak to a lawyer? And so it was both of us, and they said that I was giving them a hard time. So they put me on a high risk security. They said I was a risk to security. And so then we were separated and, put into different cells with still not knowing why we were there, for how long we would be there. And, we were there for 2 days before they released us. And we were released under pretrial service conditions. And, with those conditions, it's monthly, daily monitoring. And they charged us with 2 misdemeanor charges of violating a closure order and interfering with a federal function. And so this was in September of 2020.
Right. Could I ask you one question? The day-to-day surveillance, did that mean you had to wear an ankle bracelet, or what did that mean?
They wanted every address we would be at. And if we weren't at our home address, so they needed our home address, our phone numbers, our employment, everything, medications, everything. They wanted everything, every detail, our urine samples. And if I missed a phone call, I was given a violation. So with 3 violations, you get taken back in. There was a phone call I missed, and they called my mom, and they threatened to call the marshals, to send the marshals to my mom's place. And it was hurtful. That was awful. That was so upsetting for one phone call being missed. So then I got a call from my mom, and she was so upset. And she was like, why didn't you answer your phone? And I had no missed calls. So I called them, and to them, it was like, oh, it's a misunderstanding. It was this real big, stern, this is what you need to abide by.
Was that Customs and Border Protection, or who was them?
That was pretrial service. So we were each assigned a pretrial service officer. But that was our real life, from place to place, being followed by sheriff's departments, TOPD, National Guards, the whole shebang, TPD. It's been a year. Well, it's been over a year. It's been over 15 months of that.
And then you entered a period where you were in a trial, right?
Yes, November 4th. So Nellie Jo Davis, she took the plea deal, and I wanted to take it to trial. I felt like what they did was wrong, and how they did what they did was wrong. It felt important to fight. The government didn't want it to be fought. The government didn't even want the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to be used.
And that was your defense.
Mm-hmm. They were trying to prevent the testimony, my own testimony, and the testimony of a respected elder who was a living document for our people, for Hiacharatam, for Quito Paquito. In court, they make comments. They also attempted to compare what we did to the insurrection at the Capitol.
Really? They said that in court?
Mm-hmm. And they also, attempted to use the Navajo Nation versus U.S. Forest Service case. There was a Ninth Circuit ruling where the Navajo Nation sued, because of the snowbolts, the artificial snow desecrating their sacred mountain, and they lost. And so they were attempting to say that the government had the right to do as they saw fit to their lands, to improve their lands. They even called it, and that that there was no right that we had. So one of the things that was argued was the difference of there being, the government prosecuting myself versus me prosecuting the government. And there was also a manifest error in the charges. The charges given were for myself and Nellie Jo David for the day that we were both arrested, without them clearly reviewing what evidence they had at hand. In trial, the prosecutor's office used a YouTube video instead of using their own body cams, and they weren't able to argue their side because they also didn't include evidence to back up their claim that they used little restrictive means to remove us, and also that there was a violation of or interference of a federal function. In the footage, I'm off to the side. I'm away from equipment. I'm not interrupting anything. I'm not interfering with anything. The government could have continued the work they were doing if there were safety issues. That the government could have provided a hard hat and a vest if there were safety concerns, and it was clear cut. They lost, and so it was a shock. It sounded like we will be going back into trial or for a retrial, and instead on January 19th,
Of this year, right? Yeah, it just happened. Yeah.
it just happened. Okay, so the arrest was September 9th of 2020, and on January 19th of 2022, the judge found me not guilty.
Okay, could you just explain like what were your thoughts when you heard the judge say that? Because you said it wasn't expected, right? And so, what did you think? What went through your mind when that happened?
Oh man. I was so surprised. To be honest, my spirit is still gathering itself from all of it because of how distressful that was. They from the get-go made me feel like I was going to lose. I had my first appointed lawyer, my second, they were appointed lawyers that I was going through after the arrest. There were lawyers I was seeking out, and I was told by several that I was going to lose. And so when I continued to push forward with it, I had that in the back of my mind, but my goal was to push forward so that people could understand, like, look, this is what we experienced, and this is the how we are treated. And it was on both sides of things. It was a relief. It's a huge victory for our people, for the future of those who want to take a stand.
Yeah. So to as my last question, this sets an incredible precedent. Do you think, like going forward, as as we know, the border construction still goes on, right? There's towers being, not just the border wall. There's surveillance towers, and there's border patrol presence. There's the checkpoints that you discussed. Do you think this sets a precedent for other people and yourself, and going on, that people can actually challenge what the border patrol is doing in the borderlands?
Yes, it is entirely possible. They do make it difficult. It's not easy. It is uncomfortable. They will use all means necessary to make your life the most uncomfortable thing, to make you even psychologically feel as if you're cornered. And it's a successful tactic. These are trained individuals we deal with. These are this is our real government that is been dominating our lands for a long time. And but there's real hurt, there's real trauma, there's real PTSD, there's real suffering of a people on the ground that are not military, that are not government, that are real people on the ground. And censorship is real. Efforts to censor people, that's real. um, Even divide people. We see how politics do that. We see how lands do that. Even it's it can be religion too. Um, going through this, it has been spiritual, and it has been difficult, but it's entirely possible. We as individuals have been literally, it feels like fighting for our freedom to understand, who we are as a people and why we are where we are. And what we experience from the government. It's, there's generational trauma. A lot of us are still in the process of healing from. And so, yeah, I think it's important for future generations to know, like, yes, it's okay. Like, we can rise above it. You can speak through it. It's okay.
Well, thank you so much, Amber Lee Ortega, for sharing this experience. And what is there any other things as far as you're concerned that you'll have to do, or is this done for you now, and you're moving on to new realms? Like, what are you doing now?
Oh, heck. I'm doing a lot. So part of my goal before my involvement was to connect with my family, to connect with my Altam roots. I am a student, and I'm also in the process of healing from traumas. And so my degree is working for social work, but I also behavioral services and behavioral sciences. My goal is to help. I do gardening and be returning to work, um, working with the agriculture department. I've been a student for a while, and so it's a long journey to help on. I want to understand what it is and how it is, to go about moving forward. And in terms of health for our people, for our lands, I'm on a lifelong journey. This really isn't the beginning or end of anything. It's just this continuation of my life. To be honest, to help repair, um, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to repair, and it covers so many aspects, mentally, physically, spiritually. And the goal is to keep with it, to stay alive, and to encourage those who need some encouragement to do the same.
Well, thank you so much, Amber, for speaking with us. And I can tell you one thing: I feel inspired by your story. And thank you for all you do and all that you will do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
The Border Chronicle is reported by Todd Miller and Melissa Del Bosque, based in Tucson, Arizona. This interview was edited by me, Lily Clark. You can read and listen to more local border reporting on our website, theborderchronicle.com.